Hello, this is the Young Members podcast from Equity's Young Members Committee. Hi. Each episode, we're going to be talking about something different to do with our union and all the people in it. It's made by Equity members for Equity members. My name's Sam Swann and I sit on Equity's Young Members Committee as Vice Chair. And on this episode, I'm going to be talking to Leila Mimmack and Will Attenborough from the Pension to be Proud of campaign about Equity's pension scheme and the campaign that has been running for about 5 years now to make it a more ethical and sustainable fund. Hi both, how's it going?
Great.
Yeah.
Really strong.
I was waiting for Leila to take the first plunge.
Really
Yeah,
good.
fantastic. Thank you, Sam.
And both very polite as well. Leila, are you good?
Yes, I'm good, thank you.
Amazing. So could you just give us a quick intro to who the hell you both are?
I'm Will Attenborough. I'm an actor, been an Equity member for 8 years. I don't know, not much else really. I'm very posh. You can probably hear.
Great. Leila, who are you?
All I can think is class now, and I'm like, where do I fit? But I'm Leila, Equity member 2, and yeah, have known Will for about 6 years. I feel like this is all we do, so it's really nice to just sort of have a jazzy outing.
Well, just before we start talking about the campaign and what you've been up to for the past 5 years, could you just tell us how you got into this kind of activism, Leila?
Well, Will got me into it because about 5 years ago there was this divestment campaign which was started by 350.org, which was trying to get the London Pension Fund Authority, please all stay with me, which is basically City Hall, Sadiq Khan. Actually, he wasn't there then, sorry. And trying to get that pension fund to divest from fossil fuels. And I'd sort of been a little loner on marches, sometimes with you, Sam, or sometimes on my own. And Will was like, here's a really active way to change something that's sort of systemic and very much part of the infrastructure that we're told we're not allowed to be part of. So we sort of hung out every fortnight for a while trying to get that done.
Amazing. And then, Will, Leila mentioned divest then as well. Could you explain that as well as kind of how you got into this?
Yeah, I was I got interested into this kind of thing because of an article actually, which Leila has heard me talk about 300 times, by Desmond Tutu. He wrote in 2014 about this thing that I'd never heard of before called fossil fuel divestment, which started in the 1980s when apartheid South Africa was kind of like the human rights issue of that generation. And Desmond Tutu and others went around the world and said, take your money out of South Africa, disinvest it, divest it away from South Africa. And it challenged the apartheid government economically, and it made investing in South Africa morally unacceptable. And in this article about 6 years ago, Tutu was like, climate crisis is our apartheid. It's the human rights challenge of now. So let's use the same tools against big polluters and take money out of the fossil fuel companies that are, profiting from human suffering. And so basically that spread across the US. You had universities, faith organizations, philanthropic organizations, city governments, all pulling their money out of the top fossil fuel companies on the basis that it is immoral and unethical to profit from the human suffering that those companies are causing.
Amazing, thank you. So, so Leila, could you explain kind of how divestment actually works? Kind of how does it start and how do people begin campaigning, and then what does it look like?
There's a few ways, but I think the most sort of recognised form of divestment is something called the carbon underground, where you take your money out of the top 200 fossil fuel companies on the FTSE list. And that's the most sort of certified and celebrated divestment. But there are other forms, gradual forms. So, for instance, Hackney Borough, their pension fund is divested from coal and oil, but not gas. So there's different ways of doing it. But basically, yeah, you campaign within your pension fund, within your, as you say, if you're in a city council member, whatever it is, to ask them to disinvest from their fossil fuel funds. And that obviously includes a lot of sort of like legalities and financial advisors that I normally try and run away from, but they're there to make sure it's completely legit.
Amazing. And you've, in conversations we've had before, you mentioned that the kind of original thing, and like Will was mentioning about the kind of history of the divest movement, that originally it was about kind of morally bankrupting these organizations and institutions. And then that kind of, as it began to be more successful, that turned into actually challenging them financially, like with the potential to really, really hurt some of these unethical institutions from doing these things. Is that right?
Well, I think, yeah, there's a dual approach. I mean, one is obviously to publicly shame them, because as we all know, everybody on this call will know that we have been to the National Theatre that has a partnership with Shell. We have been probably to the National Gallery that is sponsored by BP. Like, all these fossil fuels are so intrinsically in our culture, in our public institutions, that they are greenwashed day in, day out. And so the beginning of divestment is to start extricating that relationship. And they're not these great philanthropic cultural sponsors. They're these like climate change denying, damaging, destructive industries that we need to change how we perceive them and how we recognize them. And so the public facing part is really crucial, because there's some divestment campaigns that happen behind closed doors and, you know, stuff in meeting rooms, which are great sort of to take the money out of, but a lot of it is building momentum and for other people to see that it is viable, so that the momentum can continue within maybe more austere, for instance, Tory-led councils. It's really important to keep the public facing up as well as the financial actual withdrawal.
So can I jump in on the financial element of that?
Can I just ask quickly, just to clarify about greenwashing? You kind of mentioned that, and you mentioned a bit of context around that, or kind of what it was, but could you just make that super clear what that is for anyone who doesn't know?
So greenwashing is when a company that is horrendously not green portrays themselves to be a green ally, or somebody that is much cleaner than they are. So, for instance, I think we've all seen on London Underground, you see sort of BP with their wind farms, and actually like their investment in renewable energy is less than 3%. But we start getting into our heads, oh, hang on, maybe they are the new energy. Maybe they are actually the sort of frontiers for how we transition to a low carbon and economy. And that's just not the case. They are greenwashing us to make us believe that they are still legit companies that we should trust and give our money to through our pensions and etc.
I mean, so that kind of relates to what you were saying about like the National Theatre or like the Royal Shakespeare Company or whatever, or National Gallery being sponsored by these companies to make themselves look really like philanthropic and whatever. So and it's like a PR thing.
It's a PR thing, and it also puts lots of people in difficult situations, because for the RSC, they it's 1% of their budget, what BP gives them, and that spurned this brilliant group called BP or Not BP to just go on stage and start protesting, to say, hang on, we are not allowing this PR to continue in our spaces and in our theatres. But sorry, Will, you were going to say.
Yeah, cheers, Will. on the financial side.
Yeah, sorry, this is maybe the boring side of it, but I just wanted to jump in on the element of this that has kind of taken divestment from being predominantly something that's led by activists, people who are socially minded, to something that's really mainstream in the financial world as well. And that was that you had 350.org, an organization we mentioned earlier, along with an organization called Carbon Tracker Initiative, that basically did this really basic mathematics of adding up all the fossil fuels that the major top 200 fossil fuel companies have, and comparing that to what we can safely burn in order to exist as a species on this planet. And they found that the fossil fuel companies have 6 times what can ever be safely burnt. So 85% of that coal, oil, gas has to stay in the ground. And you have people like Michael Bloomberg, Tom Steyer, you know, these sort of financial heavyweights coming in and saying, these are terrible investments. If the vast majority of fossil fuels are unburnable, they're not worth anything. And then you start seeing not just like faith groups and philanthropic organizations divesting, but like major hedge funds and the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, which is worth $1 trillion, has pulled all of its money out of oil and coal.
Brilliant. Cheers for that. So what changes then have been made? Like the divestment's been going on for quite a long time, and there's been various different campaigns across the world. What has happened?
Well, I mean, when Leila and I got started on this about 5-6 years ago, and it was mainly a kind of university, church-based movement. I think the
Turn that off, Will.
Sorry. I think the figure of the amount of money that had been like withdrawn from the fossil fuel industry was about $50 billion. It's now $14 trillion. I mean, it's just grown like in a way I couldn't have ever thought possible at the time. And I think it has done what Leila was talking about earlier, which is possibly the most important thing, in removing these companies' social license to operate and making them, giving them a sense of stigma. So you're not so proud to be cozying up to them or invested in them. But it has also really, it has made reputational risk, as they would call it, a significant threat to their very industry. So you'll have like these major fossil fuel companies saying internally, public pressure is a major threat to what we're doing. And you'll see, it's interesting, like some of these companies will try and just fight that. They'll dig their heels in, like ExxonMobil, and some like Repsol in Spain are going, whoa, we need to like massively transition into being a renewable energy company.
Brilliant. And then did you mention before, Leila, about the Lambeth divestment?
No, but I think we can talk about sort of the wins, because I feel like a lot of what this industry is incredibly slow and it feels massively disenfranchising, heads up. But I think what is really exciting is that we are now on the side, I think, of big shifts happening. So for instance, I think some of you will have heard, obviously within the space of 4 days, RSC.BP and the National Theatre stopped their partnership with Shell. That was huge. That has been like 4 years of campaigning from lots of different groups. But those start to topple. And then, for instance, within the sort of very tedious world of local council, we have been trying to pledge that the biggest overhaul umbrella that we can fall into has a fossil-free fund that we can opt into, and they're the establishment of pension funds, and so they've been really pushing back. And then a few weeks ago, they've now said that they will host a fossil-free fund, which means that different boroughs can now invest, and they have pledged to their citizens and their local, pension fundees that they will divest, and they can now do that because there's a fossil-free fund option. So that those sort of things where the biggest, as Will was saying, monolithic institutions are offering little like slithers of hope, it will only grow and get bigger, which I think is where the hope comes from.
Definitely, it's where I've certainly been really inspired by seeing the work that you both have been doing over the last like 5 years, because it feels so much bigger than just so often when people talk about the environment, it's limited to, like using your Keep cup or being vegan or whatever, which feels so kind of small, micro consumerist and individualist. And this stuff is talking about, the Lambeth fund investing 200 million into a fund, which is something that, people like you, a few individuals can campaign for over a long period of time and make that sort of change. Whereas I could never do 200 million pounds worth of damage to the fossil fuel industry on my own.
Keep trying, Sammy G. You're an angry man.
Listen, I'll try.
But I think no, but I think you're right. I think the individual things that we try and do, it keeps us sane, I think, a lot of the time. Maybe totally. I'm speaking for myself, but I think also it keeps us really vulnerable, because it sort of goes, oh God, if I recycle maybe a bit more, this calamity will end. And actually there is a really empowering way of dealing with, as you say, that amount of money, because you go, okay, and switching, which is what we're going to talk about in a bit. If you switch your pension from taking out that money, that is the most in my opinion, powerful things sort of on a monetary value thing that you can do for the climate, but we're just not told about it. We're told to keep cup, which is great, cycle, great, and you know, ass looks good, whatever. But like actually for like money, there's actually this element of going, you can shift so much in such a short space of time.
Definitely. So speaking of that, how does the equity campaign like fit into this? You both came together and started talking about this? Yeah, like what, like 5 or 6 years ago? Will, could you take this?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
just
I was
enjoying
just. Well, to be honest, I was like, yeah, 5-6 years. A big old chunk of my life. Yeah. Well, Leila and I had met on. We had started to work together on. We met in another way, but we had started to work together on a separate campaign, and we were looking at like what is the pot of money that we have leverage over, and we have our pension and this pension scheme through our union. The pension scheme is worth £150 million. There's 10,000 members in it, and humour me if this is going to be so boring, but I feel like no one ever talks about like what a pension is.
Yeah.
And basically, definitely get one. That's like the first thing. Definitely get a pension. They're brilliant. You get free money. Like every chunk of money that you contribute will be matched by your employer. So you're actually paid more money for having one. But what happens when you pay that money in is that you'll be automatically enrolled into what is called the default fund. The default fund then takes your money and will invest it across the economy. So they'll invest it in companies that make food, that build roads, but also companies that dig for oil and sell cigarettes and weapons. And so all of us, if we have a workplace pension, which we should because they're great, will therefore by proxy have money in BP, Shell, Total, etc. And so we weren't like thrilled about that as an idea. We met with Malcolm Sinclair, who was at the time the president of the union, and he was really excited and really supportive that we wanted to use the union for political change. He was like, "Oh, good," and so we sort of went to the kind of nitty-gritty of campaigning. I don't know if Leila, you want to talk about how we proceeded from there in terms of going to branches and doing a campaign launch and that kind of stuff.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's basic those things. Matt Hood's joined the call, so shout out to him. He's been a huge advocate and kept me calm, so that's really nice.
Yeah.
But no, we went to branches again. An incredible sort of network of people that are trying to just make all of our lives better, and you know, put our motion towards them, and they were really supportive. It then got ratified by the council, so then it was official union policy, which meant that it wasn't just, you know, Looney, Will and me shouting out Aviva. It had this incredible weight of high-profile people behind it as well, which is another, you know, golden ticket that we have as a union. And then Will was brave and emailed those notable people, and they were like, "Yes, I support this." So we
name a couple of the people, Leila.
So we've got, sorry, I want to make a, that's my main one in my head. So you
Mark
could go.
Rylance.
Oh, for sure.
He puts his name to everything these days, doesn't mean anything.
So yes, and then we launched our campaign in at the Young Vic, just to sort of, I think first for us to raise awareness that one, we have a pension, or get a pension because it's brilliant, and two, the leverage that we have as individuals by being part of a union that has a pension associated with it. So we were like, this is brilliant, let's go. And then it became a bit more nitty gritty. I'm going to hand that back to you, Will, for the nitty gritty.
Yeah, well, so we had this like 3 weeks or whatever where it was really successful and exciting, and we changed the union's policy, and we had this campaign launch at the Young Vic, and we did a press release that got picked up by the Financial Times, and we were like, wow, this is amazing, this like crackpot sort of a little bit of activism that
what sort of thing did the press release say, and what were the kind of the gist of the motion that you said was passed by branches and by the council?
Oh yeah, thank you. So the motion was for decarbonising the pension scheme, basically. It was for our money as pension scheme members to be invested in whatever you want to call it, a low carbon fund, a sustainable fund, a responsible fund. And it gave the union the authority to seek that from our fund managers. And we had a bunch of famous names who endorsed that, and that helped us, you know, get into the papers, and it rose the it just shed a bit of light and focus onto the fact that most of us who have pensions have our money therefore in fossil fuels. But this is where things got really complicated. So we started meeting alongside Equity with two parties. This is where it gets even more boring. We have Aviva, who is a massive pension provider and insurance company and investment company. They provide the fund that our money is invested in. So they take our money and will invest it in lots of different companies. But because the equity scheme is so complicated, because basically none of us have one employer, we're all like dotting between employers for most of our professional lives. We also have a middleman called Hensela Canworth that administer all of that. So we sat down with those three people, those three kind of parties, and said, what can we do here? And the first thing that they gave us, which was a nice little win, was they said, we're going to put an option on the sign-up sheet when people sign up to join the pension scheme, where they don't have to choose the default funds. They can choose an ethical option, which will be fossil-free, and it will invest in renewables and things that work with society and forward social change and all those kind of things. And we saw that by doing that, the uptake of the ethical option went up by 15%.
Wow.
So there's clearly demand for it.
And you said that they just, Hensela Canworth just put that on their website?
Popped it on the old website. And so if you go there today to get a pension, which I think is a wonderful thing, you can go, oh, I don't want the default fund. I want the ethical option.
So the increases in the ethical option, this is exactly what you wanted and what you started campaigning for. It's up by 15%. Probably it will go up more and more. I imagine. Is that it then? Like, are we done?
No. That was a little small win. But what we set out to change was we wanted the default fund, where the vast majority of equity pension scheme members have their money. We want that to change. That's where most of the money is. And our default, so like equity pension scheme members, our default is an Aviva fund that does not exclude anything except landmines and cluster munitions. So it could have its money in tobacco or oil. It currently has some of our money in Coal India, in China Senhu, which is another coal company. And so we thought, well, surely we can just switch that fund out and substitute it for the ethical option, right? Can't we just do that? And it turns out it's way more complicated than that. There are a lot of legal obstacles. I won't get into that because I will kill you all with boredom. But basically where we stand now is that Aviva have offered us, after many tense meetings where Leila kicked some ass, we have been offered potentially an ethical fund that excludes the top 200 fossil fuel companies and has a great set of ethical policies on labour standards and renewables investment. And we're currently waiting to see if the pricing will work out. Coronavirus has sort of, frozen everything for now, but fingers crossed.
That's incredible what you've managed in that time. And like you say, incredibly boring work, what you're talking about, through working through all of this like bureaucracy and the contracting and all that sort of stuff, like the admin that goes into that, like you reeling off these sort of companies or these industries that the pension, like that we have investments in. It's not like that information is like easily available. So like, well done and thanks. What do we do then, seeing as, like you say, there are a load of obstacles in the way of that becoming the default fund? Definitely on the Young Members Committee, like I want to try and be pushing along with many other members of the committee for it to be the default for young members. What can we do to sort of make that happen? And what can we do to make that happen, not just for young members, but for the entire union and its pension scheme?
I mean, I think, first of all, I think Hensela Canworth has to also, there's a guy called Andrew Barker who has been so supportive of this campaign, and his world is pensions. So, and he's heard like slag it off no end, and he's still like met us for drinks. So I think he deserves a lot of credit because he's really trying to enact it from his end as well. I think there's a few things that we can do. I would say if you can, again, cautiously, we are not financial experts, but you can look on a website that we'll post and link up about if you are in a default pension, maybe switching, or if not having a pension, automatically going for the ethical one, because it's just brilliant. And the more that members switch, the more we have a greater hand when we come to Aviva at the table and saying, look, X amount are increasing, the campaign is growing, it is only going to go up, Aviva, you have to respond. And they are responding, but it just gives us so much more weight. I think, have you got any other options, Will, for what people can do?
Yeah, I mean, well, before we go further, we should say we are not financial advisors. We are legally not allowed to give any financial advice or tell people what to do with their money. It's very clear that we stress that.
Matt is praying that we say that loud and clear.
Yeah. Really not going to get sued for that. So all investment involves risk, and don't listen to what I'm saying because we don't know what you should do with your money.
These are just more attacks on free speech. The union doesn't do any more of that.
And so what I can say is that if you want your money to do good in the world, probably the biggest amount of money that you'll accrue over your lifetime possibly is your pension. It's like, ideally is something that you save a little bit into. It's probably the most amount of money that people will have in the stock market, right, throughout their lifetimes. And so if you want that to do good, then an amazing tool for that is to switch it into an ethical fund. If you go to, let me see if I can find the website. Yeah, well, maybe because this is quite long for me to read out, but hensela.co.uk. If you type in Hensela Canworth Equity Pension Scheme, it's the first one that will come up. And the Hensela Canworth have put up default fund, and then there's another fund called Lion Trust UK Ethical, which they've put there as an option as well. That's a fossil-free fund. It has really great standards on the kind of things that it excludes, and also invests in companies that power social progress, which in an ideal world would be every company in the world.
So that's really good. That sounds really clear. We've got a question from Giovanni, just asking about because the term ethical option isn't a kind of legally sanctioned term. Is there a danger in this that what we call ethical is in fact just less unethical than the default fund? You've kind of explained nicely what we're talking about here. So it's fossil free and everything, but are there still kind of gaps in there?
Sorry.
No, you go,
Well, no, I think maybe I'm going to put my foot in it, but I feel like we started off ethical as an ambiguous term for the campaign. Because what we're actually fighting for is a fossil-free fund, but at the beginning of it, we were going for low carbon, and so for us, it felt like a more sort of generous term as a sort of optimistic, process. But what we're fighting for in Aviva is very much a fossil-free fund, because often what a fossil-free fund will include is it excludes tobacco. Often if they're excluding fossil fuels, they're excluding arms and tobacco, etc., etc. Hence the word ethics. But one of the hardest ones for it to exclude is the one that has got the most sort of social license still, which is the fossil fuel companies. So that's the one that we are really sort of outlining.
And in terms of what you've been fighting, it sounds like it's a kind of milestone to hit to then move on to demanding more each time.
Completely.
Yeah, and it's also a broad term in general. What people consider ethical differs from person to person. It's quite subjective, and you'll find it means a lot of different things when it comes to funds and investments. Ethical investment means a lot of different things to different people. So, but you can, what is good is that like, if you're a nerd, like Leila and I are, you can go on to like,
through lots of work. Thanks very much.
oh, bless you. You can go on to these funds and look at what they do and don't invest in. Like, that's your right to know where your money is going. And some of them operate a much stronger set of criteria than others. One other thing to mention as well is that, like, sadly, fossil fuels are not like South Africa, like I mentioned in the beginning. South Africa was in South Africa. Fossil fuels are everywhere in the world. So withdrawing your money from the very thing that powers our entire global economy is really, really complex. You could do that various different ways. You can take your money out of the top 200 fossil fuel companies, or you can say, I also don't want my money in like aviation, or I also don't want my money in companies that are just blatantly disregarding the Paris Agreement, whatever that means to you. And that's why divestment can take a few different forms.
I want to finish in maybe like 5-ish minutes, but could you just quickly run through a couple of the obstacles, like the main obstacles to this kind of activism?
I mean, for me, I think it's because it's so not sexy. Like, I think as in the jargon, the laborious work that Will is so brilliant at, that is really off-putting. It's so much more exciting to go, let's make a really sparkly banner and stand outside an evil company. Like, that obviously engages us way more. And so, as powerful and also I think community leading as that is, this is a sort of, I think it can be, I think it can be also quite elitist, and I think they don't mean to be like that, but I think I start feeling like they do mean to be like that. It's vocab heavy with words that we're not taught. We're not taught financial literacy at school, so there's this huge world that we have to learn about before we even campaign within it. I think what Will and I are really trying to do and hoping to do with this campaign is to make that literacy more accessible and to make the campaigning but less daunting. One, because it's globalized, two, because we're winning, like lots of other people are winning, so it feels like we can do it. And three, as I say before, and I will actually shut up, but you know, we can do a keep cup for 10 years, or you can spend 8 minutes doing something really tedious, but it'll be so much more impactful. Yeah, so I think those are the sort of obstacles, but Will's charming smile gets us in rooms, so that's quite good.
I think that's quality, Leila. Thank you. Will, have you
Can
got
I
anything
add
to
one
add to
more?
that? Yeah, please.
Yeah. Just the only thing, we talked about greenwashing earlier, and there'll be other discussions about how that takes place in our industry in terms of like the cultural greenwashing that Leila mentioned earlier. But I think there's also a kind of greenwashing from the oil companies themselves. I mean, like Leila mentioned earlier, BP's "We See Possibilities Everywhere" campaign. I've heard that kind of thing swallowed by like financial advisors, like people who work in the city, and they've said to me, like, these companies are spending tons on renewables. We need them to power the low energy transition. If you actually go into the weeds and you find out how much money they're spending on renewables, for the top 15 oil companies, they are only spending 3% of their entire budgets on renewables. Some are better than others. Like I mentioned, Repsol in Spain, Shell, surprisingly, are kind of leading the way amongst some of the others. But it's a tiny proportion of their actual budgets. So like, don't buy the BS, basically.
Can I just quickly, I know we want to get back onto saying happy goodbyes, but on that, just the one last obstacle is what we have been thrown every time we have a meeting is engagement versus divestment. And just to quickly say that engagement works if you're trying to create a more diverse board, if you want to raise the minimum wage in the companies, if you want to change living standards of the factories that you're invested in. Engagement works so brilliantly then. When you're trying to ask these companies that their whole business model is based on extraction and polluting the climate to change their business model, it does not work. And so divestment is the only, I know Will and I have debates about this over alcohol, but I think engagement's a really good sort of carrot and stick thing. But when people say that that's the one that they have to go for, we're way beyond that now. It has to be divestment.
Yeah, nice. I think that makes it super clear. Just could you just name a couple of kind of positive takeaways or opportunities which can kind of lead into us talking about what people can do actively with this kind of thing?
Yeah, I have one.
Yes, please.
something I learned this week. Something I learned is that half of the investment, all the investment in the UK, comes from the pension system.
No, so, half.
Oh yeah, Sammy.
That's a great stat. That.
So it's very, I don't know. I was certainly someone who thought like the financial world, the stock market, that's not something that I have anything to do with. And that world is ruled by the 1% and the billionaires. It's us. It's our money. If you have a job and a workplace pension, that's your money that's going in there. So you will be putting money into like coal, fracking, Arctic oil. So like, email your pension scheme or your pension provider, call up your bank and say, where's my money invested? Like if you have a bank and they probably will finance things, say like, who are you financing? I want to know. And if you don't get a good response, move your money away and tell the world you're moving your money away, because that is powerful. I mean, Aviva is a company that's worth £300 billion. Our 150 million is like an equity scheme is like a drop in the ocean for that. But we got them into the Financial Times because we can just think about it. So we really have power in this world.
Yeah, like you were saying before about kind of morally bankrupting them, it's like really, really important, and also lays some foundations for kind of future work, like was mentioned with the National and the RSC kind of being forced to drop Shell and BP because of like fears around people not coming anymore. And that was only off the back of these years and years and years of activism from people like you. So what can people do to get involved? I mean, you mentioned about switching to an ethical fund. You've mentioned about the button that people can press. But I think you mentioned about, I think that is when people sign up to it. If you've already got a pension, how do you switch?
So there's a link that I think we just have to put up because it's too long and tedious, but there's a Share Action link. Share Action have also been unbelievable at supporting us and our campaign, where we'll talk you through the steps of switching. Also, we've got a very, very tiny Twitter following called which is Pension to be Proud of, but it's actually at Pension Proud of. Sam told me the other day. How embarrassing. So follow us there, or and then tweet me, because it's just Pension to be Proud of is this phone. So just tweet me, and then if you go, how do I do this? I can send you the links and whatnot. But yeah, just telling your friends to get a pension switch, making it sound fun. You're all actors or directors or designers, but you can make it cool. So yeah.
And do you kind of need people to be involved with you? I mean, you both have done so much work already. Do you need more people to kind of take up more of the slack?
I mean, Matt has done so much. Genuinely, as a union, I think we have got the support. I think that for me, it's demonstrating demand. If we have another, campaign launch for Aviva, if Aviva don't really move, it'd be great to get bodies in the Young Vic again. But yeah, it really is just switching and supporting and.
Amazing.
Those main things.
So like you mentioned, obviously because this is a podcast as well, then if people can look up Share Action, what should they Google, Leila?
shareaction.org/pension-power-aviva-equity. Get excited.
That was simple.
Or just Google Share Action Equity Pension Scheme. The first hit, baby.
Nice.
That's quality. Also, have you got a mailing list?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the end.
Again, it's pension to be proud of @gmail.com, and there is a 2B in that. So.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, they're the words, not numbers or anything like that. So it's pension to be proud of @gmail.com. The Twitter is @pensionproudof. And get in touch with Leila on social media.
What you've nailed here, Sam, is that we're quite good at like reading boring things about pensions, not so good at like actually exciting people about our campaign. But that's where you come in.
Thank you, Young Members Committee.
Hey,
and Sam. Thank you so much.
But no, the work genuinely, like it's really inspired me for years and years. Because it is this sort of boring admin that, like you mentioned, it's not the sexy stuff that will actually take all of this money out of this system. It's this sort of boring work and finding out about all of these kind of quite niche things. So thank you so much for forcing through lots of this stuff, forcing through that button on Hensela Camworth's website. And yeah, have we got anything else to add before we go? Any other business?
Nothing. You have power. Whoever's listening to this, use your money.
Come on.
Invest in our invested future.
Yeah.
What was that?
Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Okay, well, yeah, we're going to finish there. Listen, enjoy your keep cups, but enjoy more your divestment. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks,
thank you,
Leila.
YMC,
Thanks everyone for
thank you,
listening.
Sam.
Thanks for listening to the Young Members podcast made by the Equity Young Members Committee. Follow us at Equity YMC and follow the Pensions to be Proud of campaign at Pension Proud of on Twitter. See you next time. Bye.